I haven't started streaming yet. Yeah, I just started now, so see something.
I always have to remind myself that your evaluation of what this is worth includes getting up early in the morning.
It should be coming up online in a second.
9 o'clock here.
9 o'clock in the morning.
9 o'clock, yeah. So.
Pardon me, but
it's not early.
I'm retired. That's early in the morning.
All right, thank you. See ya.
It's actually, I was awake at like 5:30, so.
Yeah, I was too. I went to bed. Not 5:30, but yeah, 4.
Yeah.
Okay.
You went to bed at 4?
Yeah, a little before 4, yeah.
Oh my God, you must
4.
be a night owl. Yeah.
I worked second shift for 30 years, so and then I stopped doing that, so now I have no association with the clock whatsoever.
They were trying to get my attention.
No,
and it's actually a really good thing to do is have no association with the clock. I mean, if you just use nature, look at the sun and how it's moving through the sky, and and your stomach also tells you what time it is.
Yeah, I don't. Regular is just not something that describes my habits ever anymore. I'm constantly asking people, what day is it? What day is today?
Same here.
That's probably got something to do with dementia, Mike.
You think?
Well, it could do.
Well, I'm not going to try to doubt it. I mean, how would I know, right?
Well, you know, as you get older, the first thing to go is your short-term memory. So if you can't remember what day it is, and you're disoriented,
Well,
you know, it could be first signs.
This is one of 2 things that happens in my life on a particular day.
Oh yes.
Anything else happens whenever I feel like it. You voted today?
Yes.
What did you vote for?
Charlotte,
why didn't I get a thing that said today's election?
What's the vote? What are you voting for, Mark?
primaries for the city. Mayor and councilman.
No, I remember.
Okay, so
Council
it's the local
people.
government side of things.
I remember facing the fact when I started looking at that mail I got about that I have absolutely no idea about any of these people. And I can't let myself vote party line in a local election, although I probably ought to.
No. Well,
the mayors were up.
Oh, the one that's, he's out of jail?
No. No, he's still, he's not eligible.
oh, you've got a great system there. You've got an awesome system. Oh, damn.
Yeah, I had a compilation for a while of.
Now, is he out of jail or are they out of jail?
Well, actually, yeah, I forgot, they had 2, yeah. But I had a compilation of quotes, great political quotes from America. Bitch set me up. I did not have sex with that woman. I'm not a crook. You know, this is the things that people in our government are famous for having said.
Yeah.
And I think it's interesting because mostly they're famous because we don't believe them. No, you were.
Well, the whole thing is you probably didn't vote them in anyway. I mean, you don't have a compulsory voting system anyway. And even if it was a compulsory voting system, it wouldn't be necessarily democratic. A lot of people here, because we have a compulsory system, and you actually get fined if you don't vote, but then you don't get fined if you don't enrol to vote.
Right.
So you can not enrol at all and be sort of like a conscientious objector.
Well,
but a lot of people who are enrolled to vote will go and have their name marked off the roll and submit a blank ballot paper or...
See, that's a perfectly valid vote for you people all suck, rather than not going in. You know?
And,
I came in, I looked at the
how
choices, and nobody sounds like a good idea to me.
I like the
Yes, and
idea about none of the
this-
above,
Yeah.
that option. So if none of the above wins the election, then they have another runoff. They scratch the whatever candidates
Or
and
how
then
about, hey, why
present
don't
new
we try it
candidates.
once that if
I like
you
that.
have nobody as one of the choices, and if that one wins, we don't have one this time around. You guys got 4 years to get your act together and make us want one.
There you go. That's
Well,
an idea.
our term's only 3 years at the moment, so nothing can really get traction in 3 years. And they're looking at changing it to 4 years so that people have got a little bit, or the politicians have got a bit more time to effect change. At this point, in 3-year term, all they're interested in is getting re-elected.
Yeah, you'd think that having 4-year terms wouldn't make that true, but I hate to break it to you. They just spend longer.
Yeah. Longer mucking it up.
Yeah, well, and, it's not about
How are you?
getting your message out to the voters, it's getting your message out to the contributors that really is what matters.
Yeah, I suppose so. Hey, Mike,
All right.
you commented about my big coffee mug.
Make it happen.
Do you like big coffee mugs?
I love big coffee mugs.
Bring you one over.
Woohoo! I had one once that was like this big, and it said on it, "No one should drink this much coffee."
Nice.
Well, these are like $3 at Kmart. They're cheap as dirt. So I was kind of thinking about getting a few to bring over for the office anyway. So, this one just make it happen, which is a bit naff, but it's not what's on the outside, it's what's on the inside that counts.
Yeah.
Hi, Ron. Hi, Steve.
Hey, how you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. Howdy.
Hi, Bill.
Hi, there you are.
So it's 7 a.m. in Australia?
9 a.m.,
9
Jerry.
9 a.m. Oh,
Of course, there's like 3 time zones in Australia, right?
We've got 3 time zones.
Yeah.
So we've got Eastern Standard Time, Central Time, and then Western Time. So is that the same as the States? It's probably around about the same distance across.
Well, we
I
got
would've
4.
thought.
We got 4, but
Oh,
that's because we got Maine sticking out one end, and
Oh, okay.
actually we got 6 if you count Alaska and Hawaii.
Hey, Bill.
Oh, yes, but Hawaii is kind of like, no, that doesn't count.
No.
Not that Hawaiians don't count.
People from Hawaii
No,
aren't
this
even
is on the
eligible to
live-
run for president.
I beg your pardon?
okay.
A joke. I said people from Hawaii aren't even
Oh.
eligible to run for president.
Right.
Oh, okay. Because of
Scratching my
Obama.
head on that one for a minute. I was, wait, what?
Well, Hawaii, by the way, never voted to become a state.
Really?
Yeah, after World War, we just annexed them in the 1800s and got rid of the king, Kamehameha. And then they were a U.S. territory until Pearl Harbor happened, and we just said, because of Pearl Harbor, you're a state. There was never a vote.
No, they didn't become state until considerably after Pearl Harbor.
Right.
Right.
Huh?
Right, but I'm saying it was because of that, it was because of Pearl Harbor.
Oh,
That America just said you're a state, but they never voted
yeah.
to become a state.
Cool. So we have our technology working tonight, which is nice.
Wow.
And we're now live streaming. And what we're going to be doing is I'm going to be watching the live stream during the during our meetup tonight. And so if somebody has a comment and they post it to the chat room on the live stream, I'll be able to then raise it to the group, right? So now we have some outside participation, which is great. The first announcement is, I'm really happy about this. I think that it's something we can all be proud of, is that we have a total of 494 pounds of food delivered to Second Harvest from the efforts of our group so far. There's the paperwork and there's the math on the board. So we've almost had 500 pounds of food that we help bring to families. That's great. That's cool. Yeah. So it's something tangible. That's part of this group, is to make sure we're doing something tangible.
The 500-pound gorilla in our effectiveness room.
That's right. So
congratulations, everybody.
Yeah, we'll keep that up. I mean, this is the kind of efforts so that we're creating a tangible thing. So we keep the philosophy rolling in, we keep the good information share that we have, but also we make sure there's a tangible component to what we do. Something, no matter what, something. Yeah. So I'm proud of that. I think that's great so far. So that's that. I guess the first things first. We got to get today's joke out of the way, and there's one I remember that's some loosely related to the topic. I think it's great. So this guy has a prize. This farmer has a prize. Hey, welcome. So the farmer has a prize cow, or prize pig rather. It's a big old sow. Okay, and it's time to mate the sow. It's time to get a litter. And so he loads Betsy up on the truck, and he pays a local farmer that's got a prize. What is it? A boar? I don't know. What's the male pig called? A stud? I don't know. So there's a prize champion down the road, and he makes a deal with the other farmer. He pays him to mate the pig. So loads it up in the truck on Saturday morning, goes over there, and sure enough, the pigs do what they do, and they go right to it, no problem. And so then, over the next course couple weeks, they check. Pig's not pregnant. So next Saturday, load the pig up again, load the sow up again in the truck, and down. They do this week after week after week, and no matter what they do, the sow just doesn't get the sow just doesn't get pregnant. So the farmer then tries maybe about the 10th or 15th time. He's like, it's got to work one of these times. It's got to go. Loads up again, still no result. Right? Just nothing's happening. And the farmer says, you know what? I give up. I'm tired of paying for the stud and whatever, all blah blah blah. And then so the next Saturday, after all this effort, he decides he's going to sleep in on Saturday instead of getting up early and bringing this out. And all of a sudden he hears this huge racket outside. It's like things crashing, banging, and he hears the car horn start blowing in the thing. And he asks the wife, "What is going on out there?" And she looks and she goes, "Well, I don't know all this stuff's going on, but Betsy's in the front seat honking the horn." So you can figure out what's going on there. All right, cool.
Okay.
So the chat line's working on our live stream. That's cool. No negatives about that joke yet, but that's good. So we'll get started. We'll jump right in. You guys all know our issue for this week. It's homosexuality, contemporary science, and social issues. So really big topic in our 2017. This is a pretty big topic in our culture. It's interesting. We're going to start, as we always do, with some facts and figures. And this is the first thing I thought was interesting. I have two pieces to that. I have the science, and then we're going to get into the social issues. So the science here is, this is sort of both. This is science and a social issue, but for some reason, American society greatly overestimates the percentage of people that are homosexual, right? Well, I have some stats for you.
Okay.
So the latest estimate shows that about 3.8% of our population actually identify to some extent as a part of the LGBT community. Okay. And what's interesting is what percentage of Americans actually think about that statistic. Like if you did a poll, and this is a Gallup poll, you say what percentage of the population do you think is LGBT? This is the results that you get, and it's quite amazing. 30. You can read for yourself. I don't read it, but this is kind of incredible. So the mean here is like 23, 25, and it changes. It's changing somewhat over the years. But so in the social kind of consciousness, if you will, the kind of idea is around 25% of people are, right? But in reality, it's around 3.8%. So why would there be such a large differential between those numbers? I think that's a very interesting. Yeah, please.
I think there's another discrepancy in beliefs about what percentage are atheist or agnostic. It's probably around 25%. And most people will probably think about 3 or 4.
Well, that's an interesting correlation.
I think
maybe
part of
something
it
to
has
explore
to
there.
do with cultural definition, personal definition, and self-identification are all different ways of deciding how to divide the population, because they say identify themselves.
Sure.
And the closet's bigger than everyone thinks,
Why do you think that?
because identifying publicly as gay has consequences, and everybody can deny all they want, how severe they are, or are they getting, but it does have consequences.
Does it have benefits?
Not really,
So,
but the consequence, it has consequences. It might, even if it has benefits, okay, that's a consequence.
sure.
And with we live in a sexually repressed society that obsesses on sex.
I totally agree with that. I actually have that in my presentation. You guessed one of the points.
Okay, so it's not who has ever had a sexual experience with a member of their own sex. That's not the question they ask. But for some people, if you ever had, then you're a homosexual.
Okay.
So this is like my favorite objection to things that people measure is we can't even define the stuff, but we're measuring with percentile accuracy.
Right, sure.
I don't believe we're measuring anything with percentile accuracy until we can actually get a testable definition of it. You certainly couldn't get away with that in physics. You know, I'm sorry, nobody would look at you like you were a serious scientist if you couldn't define the thing that you're now measuring to
Right.
percentile accuracy.
So what I proposed here is that, is it possible that, is this issue perhaps within our society being overserved? Like, is this issue being made possibly due to the point that was just raised here, that, you know, is it possible that, you know, the media is over-serving this issue to us, giving us this point of view that it's much more prevalent than it really is? I'm not saying that's the case. I'm saying, is it possible? Just to raise that question early, and then the perception versus the reality might be quite extreme here. The perception of how prevalent it is in society might be quite different from how prevalent it actually is, right? So, and if you look at sitcoms now for the last 10, 20 years on TV, there's always has, if the sitcom stars 3 or 4 people, 1 or 2 of them, you know, will show signs of being homosexual. And, you know, there does seem to be kind of a high representation in media of the gay community. And I'm not saying it's a bad thing or a good thing. I'm just pointing it out, right?
Well, wait a minute. Are homosexuals attracted to the theater?
I'm not sure. I would stereotypically say yes. I don't know the truth, but I'd say stereotypically yes. Is that in the art community, I think you do tend to find more people that would say they're homosexual. I don't have the data for that, so that's a reach. But I don't.
In the health services community, you certainly do.
So there might be some linkage there, and but I just wanted to point that out. So let's get into the science. The best that I would able to uncover in my research is it pretty well is been pretty much determined that there is no genetic basis. There has not been a genetic basis found to date where we can say if you have this gene, this gene, this gene, you're gay, right? There's no test for it. There's no, can't take a blood test and say, oh, you're gay. Yeah. There is no genetic origin known to date, and they've done the whole human genome, and they haven't found a marker. Yes, what's happening? Oh, am I getting emails? I didn't shut my email off. Sorry, guys. 1 second. Sorry about that, Tiffany, if you're getting buzzed.
No, that's fine. I can't see it.
No, it's just my notifications for emails are popping up on the computer. There you go.
Okay.
I cleared it.
can't see them.
It's closed. Cool. So Epigenetic, which is an important term in this discussion, okay? Down here I have the definition.
Is it in the water, you mean?
Well, epigenetic is relating to or produced by the chain of the development process in epigenesis, okay, that lead from genotype to phenotype after the initial action of the genes, and also related to being or involved in change in the gene function. So the expression of certain genes, genes activating or not, genes not activating, okay, is an epigenetic forces or causes. Now there's been all types of, boy, I found so much information about this, because that's the area of focus now for those that are looking for links between any kind of genetic cause to an expression of homosexuality, right? So right now that is where the effort is going, is looking at the epigenetic, what genes are expressed. We have twin studies where we have one twin being two twin boys, one is gay and one's not, right? So that's very unusual. So that's where you now say, okay, then if we're going to look for a genetic kind of physiological cause, a natural cause, then genetics are obviously out. Monozygotic twins, or identical twins, have the same exact DNA, right? Now, what genes are activated and expressed is based on a whole series of things. What kind of environmental factors exposed to, lifestyle, diet, a whole gamut of factors, okay? So in the nature versus nurture debate, which we'll get into, or discussion we'll get into tonight for sure, there's a huge gray area here. And there's some studies that have been suggestive of certain epigenetic markers that have a pretty high correlation, but there's been no definitive causality in any study, even ones that seem pretty promising. There's been some pretty dramatic rebuttal to those as well. So I have not found anything, and I spent a long time on this particular topic. I have not found anything that is peer-reviewed, scientifically conclusive, showing any kind of genetic origin. And I think this is extremely important, and it has tremendous implications for this social topic, right? Obviously,
what about brain scans, Chris?
Yes, the brain scan studies, we can pull up that particular one, and every single study of this nature comes, I shouldn't use the word nature, every single study of this type always leads to the same thing, is that you have a group of people that identify as a certain way. Like if you had 150 people that say they're all gay, you do the brain scans, you will find commonalities amongst those brain scans, right? But the same is true with soldiers. The same is true with
Republicans.
You know. Yes. Right? And so when you do have a like group or a like cultural group, you'll find these commonalities every time. Every time you look, you will find these commonalities.
So it's a marker of the group, not a cause of it.
No, it's a statistical consequence of the fact that if you divide people into groups and then examine their DNA, you can find things that are the same.
Right, that's right.
Why we should be surprised by that is absolutely a mystery to me.
Right, that's right. So this is very interesting. So there has been, the bottom line here is that we really don't have any concrete, there's no test. You're not going to go to the pharmacy and get a test and draw your blood and find out, if you're gay or not. It just doesn't exist. All right. So moving on here. Let's get into this kind of some.
I'm sure there are people that wish that they had that test when they're vacillating between, wondering whether they are or they aren't.
Sure.
What do they identify as? Wouldn't it be great to have a blood test to say, well, yeah, you are gay, so that it takes away that anxiety and the
right.
stigma.
Yeah, definitely a reduction in the stigma. That would be fantastic if we could get people to have that mental release and have that, if possible. As of right now, it's not possible.
I got to tell you, that's an optimistic view of humanity, that if you identify the science behind it, you'll do away with the stigma. Because, I'm sorry, I find that extremely unlikely.
Yeah, you're probably right, but I don't think it would hurt.
There would be people who aren't following their genetic genotype or their sexual stereotype, and we'll have to have a whole new name for people like that, because then we can decide who hates them and who doesn't hate them,
Yeah, great point. So when we look at these things, one thing that just comes to mind naturally from, you don't even really have to research this to kind of come to the common sense conclusion here, that if there's a genetic selection going on here, there'd be a reductive process. So in other words, if someone is a genetic has a genetic expression of homosexuality, and they do not have interest in the other sex, they are not going to produce offspring. That therefore is not going to pass on those genes. It would naturally selectively reduce from the gene pool over time. It just would, right? That doesn't take a leap. That doesn't take any kind of scientific evidence to prove. That's just common sense. If there's some selector that causes someone not to pass on their genes, whatever genes that they possess do not get carried forward. Obviously, the only way that your genes get carried forward in the genome is if you have offspring.
Well, there are cases of homosexuals mating heterosexually to produce offspring and
Sure.
raising them.
Sure.
Homosexual couple.
Yeah, I'm talking about idealized homosexuality, one in which there'd be no sexual attraction to the opposite sex.
And
Right.
you also have to deal with the fact that if there are genetic causes for heterosexual selection and homosexual selection, they have been in place for as old as our genome. And however much the tendency towards non-procreation is, unless it's an extreme recessive, it's going to become less and less common in the population on account of it selects itself out. Now, that's pretty much proof that it's not a dominant. You got to have homosexuals on both sides of your ancestry if that's the case, because it would have to be a recessive, because a dominant would be selected out almost instantly. I mean, 10 generations would be gone. That's not, none of that seems to me to be at all likely, because it's not something that, and also it presupposes that having children is primarily an expression of sexual identity. Ask the kings and queens of Europe about that one.
So that raises another interesting topic that we are going to address, which is that differential between identification versus, so like a belief or an ideology that you are a certain thing or way, a belief in that, versus an actual kind of hormonal, some kind of biological expression of something, right? So like, I can think I'm a woman all I want. Or like, I can think I'm a woman all day long, but no matter how much I think I'm a woman, that doesn't empirically make me a woman, right?
Unless you start doing that.
Yeah.
Unless you start the process.
Yeah, well, unless there's some way that I can rewrite my DNA, or something, and I'm not going to be able to get rid of my X chromosome,
You put your lippy on.
Yeah, I could change my outward, I can change my outward appearance, have surgery, hormone replacement therapy, all these measures I can do to try to become more woman-like. But no matter what, I'm not going to be able to change my DNA, at least not with current technology.
According to the current definition, there was a time when the existence of a breast and vagina would be proof enough. The existence of a penis would be proof enough.
But we've advanced the kind of scientific understanding
We have
of
changed our definition. I don't know if I want to call that an advance.
We also have hermaphrodites.
We've always had hermaphrodites.
Yeah, I've always wondered about that. Yeah, because we talked last week about, or last time I was here, about race, and I thought that all the racial things should be dropped, and I still do. But where it says male and female on forums, I think that's on the ropes now. Just saying, are you male or female is not going to be feasible in a few years.
Maybe so, and if so, though, I think that would be more forced out from a social standpoint than a scientific one, because the amount of people that express with the very rare types of like XYY, XXY, stuff like that, we're talking a tiny, tiny, tiny percentage of human population. An overwhelming majority of population is XX or XY on the 23rd
Well,
chromosome.
I don't think there's any way of factoring out social concerns studying homosexuality.
That's a great point. I think that we do have an intrinsic link between social and scientific. In fact, in many cases, many cases, the social, right, universal truth is measured in mass appeal, more so than measured in empirical logic. Right? Now that's a really interesting state that we find humanity in, right? Because if universal truth is measured in mass appeal, if what people think becomes then the truth, we're in a kind of a brave new world, I think. Whereas there is a percentage of the population that don't think like that. Like I am definitely a critical thinker. It doesn't matter to me what people believe. What matters to me is what the facts say. Normally, Now, I'm sure that I have all kinds of areas where that's not the case, but in the majority, when I compare myself to a majority of my peers, I tend to focus much more on empirical information than colloquial information. That's just me. But I don't think the population at large is that way. I could be wrong, but I don't believe I am. Bill, were you going to say something?
Well, it was back a ways. On forums where there has been just male or female to choose from, I don't think that those blocks are going to go away. They're going to be added ones like, not decided, or prefer not to say, or
None of the above.
none of the above, yeah.
Why do we have to have that there anyway?
Thank you.
Why can't we just be people?
What do you have planned that makes it necessary for you to know my sex? This is a job application.
Yeah, but I think that there are studies that can be done and are done that have to do with, like, well, how likely are you to succeed in this particular area if you're female or male or something else, and so forth. So I think that as soon as you have that kind of data, then you can start looking for relationships.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't have the data, then you can't.
So if you're going to predict, I can see some reasons for sex, much more than I can for race. Like, for example, if you're going to do strategic planning on what type of services you're going to allocate, like in a census situation, or that would be important information to know. So, like, a really perfect example is that you probably would be adding more Planned Parenthood locations in an area where there's more women, right, than you would ones that had more men. Just makes sense. So that, and then other things like mammograms, preventative medicine treatments will be very gender specific. So those type of things, I think there is an area to where that kind of information becomes important or valuable.
Get breast cancer too.
That's true. That's true. I haven't heard any,
They
ovarian
don't
cancer.
necessarily have mammograms.
Yeah, and they're not going to get ovarian cancer, for example.
Right, but they get prostate cancer.
They get prostate. So having
Testicular cancer.
that's right. And so having that sexual demographic information could be useful in service delivery. I can see an area there. And I don't
But
think.
why do you need it? Why do you need it when you're actually booking an airline ticket?
That's a great. That would be an area where I'd say it wouldn't be necessary. I can think of a reason. Identification.
Classification. Yeah.
Okay. So identification might be, identification could become important if there's an emergency or, okay, I can see some defining characteristics like that. That'd be useful. But off the top of my head, I can't think of very many good reasons. I think there's a lot of cases where information is being requested and it really is not necessary.
In general, though, it's much more likely that we will try to get more information rather than less.
Sure.
Stop acquiring.
So what information does is empower other people.
Yeah, that's a great point. So, socially, we can talk about the social implications of collecting sexual-related data or sex-related data, and what that we can dive into that. I didn't plan on that, but we can dive into that a little deeper if we feel that's necessary. So let's look at this real quick. This epigenetic piece. So when we look at epigenetic marks, the current studies that look at certain epigenetic markers, there have been some that identified of being corollaries to homosexuality, the expression of homosexuality. That exists. It's known now too that the percentage of increase in the percentage chance of someone becoming or identifying as homosexual as the first, second, or third born male in the family, okay, the actual fetal hormonal differences there will cause a statistical change in the chances of homosexuality being emergent. I find that very interesting, right? That's the fetal androgen exposure. So an androgen things, under overexposure to those hormones does have a tendency to correlate with some of the statistics, okay, which is really interesting. And then this heritability, these epimarks being able to be inherited to some extent, are also part of this discussion, which I think is pretty amazing. But these monozygotic twin studies, so identical twin studies, have been pretty much the major focus here, focal point of most of these. And that's where we get pretty much the largest determinant factor that it's not a core genetic issue. It's not a core genetic root cause, but that there very well may be an epigenetic cause.
Now, epigenetics can be changed within your generation.
Yes, it can. In fact, it can change throughout your lifetime. Different exposure to different environments, different foods, all kinds of stuff can change your epigenetics throughout your life, and they do change. Aging itself changes your epigenetics. So which genes activate and deactivate throughout your life are dependent on a whole host of environmental factors. So, but then we get into this nature-nurture again area where it's very difficult. So to nail down scientifically, to say there's a scientific definitive method that we can point at to know if someone is gay or not does not exist, is kind of the bottom line takeaway. But that's not to say that there isn't possibly, right, some genetic interplay into the equation of whether or not someone becomes homosexual. It's kind of what I was able to deduce from all the information I consumed for this. Yeah. Now, if you guys have something that I don't know or haven't raised, by all means, please. So now we get into the social issues, and now we get into the fun part, right? So these social issues are where we have a majority of the information. The majority of the information that's being discussed in our culture is related, is fundamentally around the social issues. I do not hear complex conversations about science often in our culture. I see them surrounding this issue. I see the social implications being the ones that are raised majoritively in the media and in our culture, right? So what I'm saying here to start with is these genetic or epigenetic factors have a very high implication in shaping public opinion. Because if public opinion predominantly is that it's a genetic cause, I was born this way, okay? Then any kind of legislation or any kind of seeming action against that group that restricts a group like that in any way seems very draconian, and people will march in the street. But if the implication is that people are making a choice, people are just deciding to live this particular lifestyle, right? It's much easier to accept imposed limitations or restrictions on this type of grouping of people.
So, is it a choice?
I don't know. I have my opinions, but I don't know, and I don't think anybody knows. And the best science that I've been able to read is that it's definitely a combined factor. It's combined between hormones, which genes are expressed, all types of things. What type of parenting, what kind of relationship you had with your mother determines. It turns out to be a pretty large factor here. Which all types of factors. What's your diet? If you're a smoker, you're more likely to be homosexual. What? So there's all types of corollaries, but there's no definitive if X, Y, Z, then then A. That doesn't happen. There is no if X, Y, then Z. That doesn't exist.
What is the actual relevance to ethics, though?
That's definitely the social. That's definitely the social piece. For example, this transgender HB2 law, right, that we had, or H2B, whatever it was, here in the Carolinas, HB2, yeah. Here in the Carolinas was huge. This was huge. This had people debating all throughout our state. Inevitably, from what I understand, certain rock concerts didn't come, and there was economic consequences of this. And the idea that you have to use the bathroom that's assigned to your birth certificate, not the bathroom of the gender that you identify with, is the core issue here. So people that were born a man but then decided they wanted to be a woman and dress like a woman and everything else weren't allowed to use the female bathroom. So, this created a huge stir. Now, I don't know.
A lot of crap.
Yeah, crap was involved.
It accomplished the political
Yeah, I know, but if you need to
purposes.
pee, you need to pee. Just let you pee as long as you can pee.
Yeah, and I was advocating for, I don't care what bathroom you use as long as you wash your hands. Yeah, that was my thing.
Whereas I was advocating for, I don't care which bathroom you use, as long as you don't limit the rights of people to take class action lawsuits against governments and corporations that discriminate on the basis of sexual orientation. Because that part of the bill never even got mentioned. Everybody was too worried about who's peeing where and not worrying about what the point of this bill was in the very first place.
So the way that I've had in some of my discussions, it's been the whole argument has been framed to me. Come on, would you want your little girl to be in the bathroom and some dude walks in, right, into that bathroom dressed like a woman? Would you want that person in there, you know, with your kid? And you know, I didn't have a response to that. I was like, well, you know, I'm not thinking that way, you know, personally, but I don't know. I don't know.
Pedophiles?
I don't know. Does the person that has that dressed as a woman have somehow a statistically much higher chance of being a pedophile?
They have a bunch
And
of
assaulting in bathrooms? I don't know. What's the data?
I thought transvestites were the least likely to be vile.
Transgendered and
Maybe so.
transvestites have a lower percentage occurrence of violent felonies, felonies in general, other than being transgendered, which is a felony some places, and specifically, they don't target children. Ephemophiliacs and actual pedophiles are predominantly homosexual males, overwhelmingly homosexual males. So I'd rather have my son go in the girls' bathroom. He's safer.
Well, there's probably.
I'd like to believe what you just said. I spent quite a bit of today looking up proof of that. I found too much proof of the opposite. However, I do feel that all that stuff from the opposite, that was easy to prove in those days.
Sure.
But there's so much basis for against that.
So do we see more? I don't know what the statistics are. I did not research that as part of this. But you know, is there more deviance amongst people that are you know, transgender, or is there more sexual deviance in that realm? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question.
When it comes to mass, or what do you call them, multiple, the mass murderers, the mass that do a lot of frequency, they check with those people and they claim that 5 out of 5, the worst 5 were all homosexuals and so forth. But I don't know if they knew what homosexuals were in those days. The accusation was, how do you back it up? You know?
Was their sexuality expression frustrated?
Probably, it seems, based on what Jerry's saying.
There are probably a lot more components to the profile than just sexual orientation, though.
Yeah.
And this, you know, it's difficult to just, it's easy to pull in people's sexuality and say that's the cause, but I'm sorry, I think that serial killers have got more problems than their sexual orientation.
So there is this thing, I have this image up here of safe zone. A lot of schools and a lot of different places now will have these specially designated symbols that are placement, you know, as placards. And this is just one idea of the icon. There's several. There's one with like a kind of like a line drawing of an adult protecting a kid with the arms around the child.
Yeah, I always thought that particular symbol was perverted.
Yeah, that looked pretty creepy.
It looked like a guy standing behind a girl, reaching around, grabbing her boobs.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. That one creeped me out a little bit. But the idea here is socially, do we have an actual empirical, statistically viable issue here with these people that have sexual, you know, identification, you know, sexual, I don't want to call it misidentification, but someone that sexually identifies as the sex that they weren't born as, you know, whatever you want to call that, homosexuality. Is this group actually in need in the current society of special protections? You know, I've of course heard cases where, you know, the gay boy was abused in the school, and you know, it led to suicide. You know, I've heard of these in the media. But is this all part of this kind of phenomenon that I mentioned earlier, which is this, which here is this media representation, this media over-representation of these cases? Or is this actually a genuine statistical issue that our society needs to face? And the best data that I've been able to find is that it's not, but I could not just have found the right information. Maybe it is a huge problem, social issue. I don't know the answer to that question, right? I was not able to find reliable information from like CDC or anything like that, that says that homosexuals and LGBT community needs special protection from any other group. I have not found that information. It very well may exist, but it doesn't seem to exist. It's not very easily found, right? So you guys can help me on that. If you know something I don't know, please.
But they are subject to hate crimes, basically, right?
Well, yeah, we get into this special protections kind of area, and the Constitution guarantees equal protection under the law. Is giving a special group then a more consequence if any kind of crime is bestowed on this. So if I assault Jerry, then assault you, right? And then you happen to be gay, homosexual, okay? And then why should I face a greater charge for assaulting you than assaulting Jerry? I think that's an important thing. Should a group get special provisions under the law, special protections? Should we be doing that, as a society?
Well, the legislature has decided yes.
So then they must believe, or there must be a belief that that group needs special protection. So there's probably so much advocacy for LGBT rights that then the legislature has pressure to then make these special provisions. But is that constitutional? Constitution says equal protection under the law. So are we now getting into an area where society is pushing legislature to act in an unconstitutional way on behalf of these advocacy groups? It's very interesting. And then I said down here, does that create then a trend? Does that create a trendy cultural phenomenon to where more people want to become part of that special group? That might be a force. That might be a factor.
I'm kind of wondering whether the initial meaning of equal protection under the law had to do primarily with not protecting certain people as opposed to the increased protection of certain people. Like, oh no, we shouldn't protect certain people more. I doubt that was the original idea. It was that we should be concerned about everybody and kind of have not disregard the safety of certain groups.
Absolutely. So I think that we've kind of seen this in domestic disputes. If a woman, smacks a man around, I think that's quite a bit different than a man smacking a woman around and how that's treated both in law enforcement and culturally in our society. I mean, you guys have surely seen these things in your lifetimes where, there's plenty of cases these days where there's a woman slapping a man around. I mean, we had a family couple that was a friend, and the woman was very, very dominant over the man to the point where most reasonable people would consider it abuse, And amongst the other men in the immediate peer group was like basically, man up, you're just being a wuss. But if it was the other way around, it would be completely unacceptable for the man to be dominant like that over the female. So, these now we have these cultural representations where these groups are kind of enjoy special privilege or special protection. And so that is a certain to some people, probably people that feel disempowered in general, that could be a great allure. That could be a great alluring force to bring someone towards that group, I would imagine. So if someone feels in their life underpowered or underprivileged and identifies then with a group that is now receiving extended privileges, it would make sense that would be a potential draw to that community or that group. Just makes sense to me. So this also, there's this big thing that I read about, is lots of targeted advocacy, especially oriented towards the schools. It's this idea that we have to teach teachers about the special protections that these vulnerable children that are identifying as part of this LGBT community, they need the special, advanced, accelerated protection from the armada of bullies that are out there waiting to stomp these kids. And
with peanuts.
Mm-hmm.
Because, I mean, they got to be protected from the peanuts too,
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So this targeted advocacy thing.
And gluten.
Yes.
This targeted advocacy, I don't think is personally, my opinion, is that this probably should be something that should be discouraged in schools, is to really be forcing this targeted advocacy into our school system. It's making our schools then have yet another thing they have to deal with the complex now nature. What I see in our society is that police forces and school systems, okay, have had increasing pressure put on them to be more social mediation, right? So now police officers have to do a lot more with mental health.
They're social workers.
Social workers, that's right. Social work has now been pushed dramatically more so. There's been a big decrease in mental health services in our society in general. Over the years, there's been a decrease in mental health options for people, and that's been pushed now more into the schools and more into law enforcement. And so it's pressure that's now, so I personally don't think that this increased advocacy is necessarily a good thing.
Well, are we not aware that some children, perhaps identifiable, are going to be more prone to be bullied? And wouldn't there be some reason for having some increased awareness of their vulnerability and therefore increased efforts to protect them?
I'd say yes, but to what? When do we get? How far do we go with that? Is the question. It's kind of a slippery slope argument.
Yeah, I agree with what Chris, you've just said something that's important, because my oldest son's autistic. He's also a target for bullies. My second son has ADD. He's a target for bullying. I mean, because they're boys, they're target for bullies. Because I am a girl, I would have been a target for bullies at school. You could pick anything that we are to be a target for bullies. So, being gay is just one of them.
Maybe we could target the bullies.
Yay, that'd be a thing.
Bully the bullies?
No. All of this money that's being spent to protect separate groups from being bullied, let's put some serious consequences on bullying.
Yes.
You get to be in the mean-ass bastards class. You guys can all pick on each other, and we're not even going to watch. I mean, what the hell?
I would like to watch that on closed circuit.
That's because you're perverted.
Steve, please.
Make you a principal.
Yeah, I was picked on when I was growing up because I was fat.
Okay.
There weren't that many fat kids at the time. Now it's very common, but at the time, it was kind of rare.
And so, my witnessing by volunteering in my child's school and all this kind of stuff, the quote-unquote bullying of today is quite dramatically different from the bullying that I saw and experienced when I was a kid. I mean, and then from what I hear from the stories of the generation before me, it's definitely getting better. From my own experience, just been witnessing, it's gotten a lot better than it was in the past. I mean, it was brutal. There was brutal bullying when I was a kid. I mean, physical and everything else, and it was just allowed to happen.
Isn't it more psychological today?
Could be.
Are you talking about physical bullying? I mean, like now there's great concern about cyberbullying.
Sure, which wasn't even a possible thing when I was a kid, right? So, granted, it probably has changed forms. It might be just as intense as it's ever been, but I'm speaking more of the physical aspect for sure. Like that's what I was talking about.
Cyberbullying can result in suicide.
Sure.
Or attacks.
Sure.
Yes.
Sure.
Violence.
What the frequency of that is, I think, would be an important statistic to have a look at. There was people when I was just a kid, and I was in a good school. There was people that were, like you said, fat or weird looking or somewhat mentally challenged, and they were just romped on. And I mean, when I hear stories from the previous generation, it was even worse. And it was like a real turn the other, kind of look away type thing from what I understand from previous generations. It was just part of being a kid. The school playground politics. Yeah. Too bad, so sad. Man up, learn how to deal with it. And that's kind of changed, I think, in our vernacular. I think that's changed. And I think that the schools are now much more responsive to bullying today than they were in the past. That's just what I've witnessed. Maybe I could be looking at such a small data set here that, But anyway, there's a couple comments in the live stream here. Schools don't need a safe zone for students that identify as LGBT. The school is supposed to be a safe zone for all students. So a comment here. So that's kind of saying, you know, everyone should be safe. I think that's a pretty good point. There's another one here. Drumming up a special safe zone at school only brings more attention to sexuality instead of focusing on learning. So maybe they should be less focused on sexuality and culturally charged issues like LGBT issues and spending more time on math and science. You know, that's maybe
And history.
Maybe a decent point there.
It kind of implies that if we don't look at it, it will go away. We've had some discussion about that.
Yeah. What about that?
What
about
about
that?
is true.
Yeah.
Well, if you give someone special privileges for belonging to a minority class, more people will seek out that minority class.
That does make logical sense. But is there something to be said about marginalizing an issue to marginalize an issue? Like in consciously not giving a lot of time and attention to some topic, right, to reduce the amount of time and attention given to that topic.
Right.
Is that a thing? Would that
In the
work?
first place, I think that bullying is a part of our basic animal nature. It happens in other species also. It's a dominance hierarchy kind of behavior, and so it's always going to be there in various forms.
What's that called, henpecking?
Yeah, there's all
Pecking
sorts.
order.
Pecking order.
Pecking order, yeah. So I think that, sure, we can look the other way and say, oh, well, you know, there's a certain amount of bullying, a certain amount of suicide from it, and so forth. But I don't think that that's optimal. I think that really increasing our depth of understanding of it and being, working in whatever ways we can to stop this tendency that we have of struggling for dominance and forming gangs that are that team up against other people and so on.
There's two things I have up here that I want to discuss as a group, because I think that I came up with a few ideas, but I think my thinking was a little limited there, and I want to get some mastermind going here. So what would the implications be of natural causes? In other words, science finds this definitive kind of markers, definitive roots to this phenomenon of homosexuality and different sexual expressions. What would the actual social implications be if it became determinate, if it became a deterministic thing?
Well, now what do you mean deterministic?
In other words, I can draw your blood and then turn around and say, you're gay. What kind of implications would that have? Would, for example, would parents start to screen their children in the womb for these genetic markers and have a preterm abortion? Could the implications of the natural origins?
See, I think what you just described is an implication of genetic testing in utero, because they're going to be already choosing for blonde hair and blue eyes, and I mean, everybody can talk about how they're not going to do that, but they are going to do that. It's going to start with the very rich, and it's going to move its way down, and people are going to be selecting children. Natural selection is out.
So if there became a natural cause kind of proof, right, or a way to see this from an empirical data, would we try to cure it?
Well, there's also already selection for sex.
Sure, absolutely, absolutely. There's certain things that are, yeah, there's certain things that are selected. Like, for example, if you have an extra chromosome, right, the majority of people abort that child.
Right. Which makes sense.
Some people argue that it does not make sense. Some people argue that that's vicious. I mean, some people argue that the society has more than enough resources to take care of these people that are born with Down, and there's no reason to abort that child. I agree that it should. I agree.
Downs isn't an extra chromosome, by the way.
Isn't Down syndrome an extra chromosome? No.
It's a difference.
Yes, it is.
It's a difference in one of them, but it's not an extra.
Trisomy 21. There's a couple of chromosomes that are affected.
Well, it's a chromosomal disorder that's very easy to detect in utero,
Yes.
and I think a lot of people then choose to have an abortion if that's what's found.
Which
See,
makes sense to me.
It does make sense to me as well, but there is some
I think
counter
the person in whose uterus this fetus resides has a right to make that choice, and everybody else's opinion should be told to shut the hell up. It's none of your business. But I'm pretty hardcore on this subject.
Well, see, then you get into the ethical question of, does she have the right to impose upon society the increased costs in taking care of this person for their lifetime?
Anybody who doesn't take care of their kids has that right.
I think the answer to that question is yes, she does have that right. I mean, that might not be how I want it to be, but the answer to that question, I believe, is a straight yes. Like, a person has a right to have a child and never take care of it either. So,
or teach you to be a serial killer.
Yeah. Now, whether or not it's the right thing to do is a whole other story. But if we're going to ask straight up, does she have the right? The answer is yes. Yeah. So that.
But is it moral?
Right. That's what I was saying. We get into then how ethical that is. That's a topic in and of itself. But so specifically related to homosexuality, would that be an actual implication, right? Like I believe it would. I think that people would, if there was deterministic, if you could draw some chordal blood in utero, and they came back and said your child's going to be homosexual, there would then
and you are too.
Yeah, or you might be too. Yeah.
No, if we've determined I can tell them that when the fetus is homosexual. At the same time, I should mention to you that you're homosexual too.
Well, not necessarily, because it would come from this whole genotype thing, right? It would come from this. It would come from this, this genotype idea. So you might be a carrier. Your woman and the husband might both be carriers. Neither of them expressed it. It got expressed in the child because two recessive traits, right, came out. Boom, the child is going to be gay. I think that it would have a serious implication that would lead to abortions. I mean, for sure. Just makes sense. You even said yourself that it's a disadvantage to be homosexual. Your perception is it's a disadvantage, and I have the same perception.
I don't see it being an advantage anywhere. So
yeah. I think that's so. What other implications might there be in society? Could we start then having that be a test for entry to all types of things? Would perhaps certain universities or certain organizations test for that then? This could be pretty radical if there was a genetic or epigenetic known cause, right, for homosexuality. It can have serious consequences in society. So let's look at.
If it was going to be a positive consequence or a negative consequence.
Yeah, good point. There would be a whole host of negative consequences and a whole host of positive consequences. I think from the positive.
It could be that people who are homosexual have overall higher IQs and impact various. It might just prove that they're better people. So it might be an advantage to have a homosexual child.
And then eventually it could be compulsory.
Wow.
Well, if you did have a large percentage of the population be what I would call a pure homosexual, meaning they'd have no interest in the opposite sex, boy, you'd have a reduction in population pretty quick, right?
Yes, sure would.
So that might be an okay thing.
Assuming that heterosexual sex is the only way to become pregnant, I suppose that's true. But given the technological level you're talking about now,
yeah.
Give me my favorite 43 chromosomes, put them together and stick them in my I have a woman who's agreed to gestate it for me.
Yeah, or Womb 2000 machine. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, you're right. We got a lot of stuff we're facing within a century for sure. Probably within 3 decades.
Designer babies.
Not just designer babies. This whole concept of natural birth is kind of oogie. I mean, I'm sorry. It's
I've seen it before, and I agree with that statement.
What, natural birth?
Yeah, it's pretty gross, Tiffany. No offense, it's pretty gross.
Actually, I thought it was really.
It's very natural.
I thought it was really cool.
Yeah, I take a crap too. That's natural, and that's pretty gross too.
No, I thought it was really cool. I mean, really, that's.
Oh, yeah, I thought it was cool.
The most amazing.
I thought it was cool, but it was kind of gross. In my opinion. It was a beautiful thing, but it was gross.
Okay.
Sorry, it's a joke.
Stop
Too easy to joke about. All right, so what would be the possible implications of nurture causes? Meaning, it becomes determined that this is just total choice. It's just people that didn't get enough attention from mom.
Re-education camps.
Re-education camps, that's a definite consequence of something like that.
Torts.
Torts?
Torts. We can sue those bastards now.
Okay, yeah, sue your parents for raising you a certain way. That
Right, and I would rather they had raised me the other. So that's extra, I mean, you got torts both ways. The law firms.
I'm glad I opened that up. I never would have thought of that angle. I never would have thought of the angle of suing someone for causing you to be gay. But that is.
Or not making me gay.
Or not.
I can sue them either way.
Or not. That's right. That's great. That would be a huge implication.
You can sue a ham sandwich.
Yeah. That's a hilarious joke, but at the same time, we can actually make that a serious thing. That food company that added that additive, that's now known as a big predominant reason for environmental cause for creating homosexuality, made me gay, because my mom always made me ham sandwiches. And that nitrate that's in there is an epigenetic trigger that activates certain genes that lead to me being gay. So yeah, mom, you and boar's head ham, made me gay. Class action lawsuit. Yeah, I mean, that's great. That's great. I never thought of that. That would be huge implication, right? So the nurture also for legislation, the legal, not only the legal, but the policy, the government policies that are being made. If it's just completely choice, then the whole bathroom thing now makes a lot more sense, right? Does the whole bathroom thing make more sense in the nature or the nurture?
The bathroom was a red herring. It had nothing to do with anything to do with who goes in the bathroom. I'm sorry. If you're a transgendered woman, you have male genitalia, and you go to you want to live life like a woman, and you go in the ladies' room, the one thing you're going to do in the ladies' room is act as much like a woman as you possibly can. You're not going to try to stick out of the crowd as the guy in the women's bathroom. It's not going to happen. Why would you want to be actually identified as a woman? Now, if you're some sort of
logical.
If you're some sort of a phebophile and dress up like a woman so you can get in the girls' room, okay, that's a lot of things that are really skeevy, but it's not being transgendered.
Yeah, something different.
It's something else.
So if it's subjective, if I just say that I identify as a woman and I slip into the woman's bathroom because I have some type of perversion,
Yeah.
okay, and I love to hear a woman pee or something, right? And I just say, oh, well, I'm a man, but I feel like I'm a woman. I have the right now to go in that woman's bathroom. That's kind of weird. We get into kind of some gray areas when we look at these implications.
Isn't it in Japan a while back? There weren't men's rooms and women's rooms.
Everybody peed together.
Yeah.
That's also another solution to the problem too. Just make bathrooms. Go into the bathroom.
Desexualize urination and defecation. That sounds like a good plan. I'm sorry.
Can you speak up, Tiffany? You're having a hard time hearing you. You're kind of low.
I'm sorry. I was saying that in men's bathrooms, don't they have a urinal where you can just pee up against the whatever it is? But in women's bathrooms, there's just a toilet and there's a closed door. So why not just have a toilet with closed doors? Why do men expose themselves in the bathroom anyway?
Men have this tendency to spread their pee all over the place.
Yeah, that is
Well, sit down.
kind of bad.
No.
It's not a
No,
manly thing to do.
You sit down. So
They like to pull it out and wave it around.
the sense of pride.
They don't just do that in the bathroom, can I tell you?
This brings me to what I think is the crux of this matter, and the whole thing is that I think that I have two radical opinions to share. Okay? One radical opinion.
Only two?
Yeah, only two, unfortunately.
He's going to share it.
Two radical opinions to share. I usually don't share radical opinions in these. I usually just kind of go kind of passive. But I'm gonna go on a limb. Share two radical opinions that I have here. Radical meaning not the common ideas. Right? Is that We have a cultural bias in America that is horrendous. I think it's despicable. We have this glorification, acceptance of all kinds of violence in everything. Kids' games, sports shows, TV, sitcoms, you name it, movies. Violence, violence, violence. Violence in our language. Violence everywhere, to this epidemic proportionality of violence. But as soon as Janet Jackson's nipple pops out on the Super Bowl, everyone is up in arms about what a horrible society, like something must be done, you know? And we're backwards as hell as a culture in this regard. It should be the other way around. Sexuality, human form, the human body should be much more liberated than it is now. It shouldn't be such a social taboo. It should be a totally different thing. Huh?
I agree perfectly.
I agree.
That doesn't sound
Oh, see, well, I have a
radical.
radical crew here. Okay, this is great. And we should start putting great offense to the level of violence that's portrayed in our media, in our vernacular, in our language, in our culture. We should start standing up violently against violence and stop all this nonsense about social and sexual taboos.
And a lot of other things. Recently there was Jerry Jones said that if any member of the Dallas Cowboys fails to stand up for the national anthem, then he will no longer be a Dallas Cowboy. And somehow somebody fast on the trigger got the very first comment underneath it and said, yeah, but felony assault's still going to be okay, right?
Right. That's right. So that is a first radical point of view. My second radical point of view, specifically related to my research and my thinking on homosexuality, is that we need to, two things about that, two subpoints about that, is one, we need to stop convincing people that it's necessary for them to predicate their identity with their sexuality, okay?
Yay.
That's first point of view. And second point of view, we have to start putting it in proportionality to the actual relationship within society, like I showed you. The idea of that the media has presented is that this is just such a hot button, you know, the pelvic politics, and it's tied into that American culture taboo of sexuality.
Pelvic politics?
Yeah, pelvic politics. Everyone wants to talk about abortions and what bathroom someone can pee in, right? And did you ever notice that when these politicians or these people get really interested in this, they want to know, like, you know, does he have a penis? You know what I mean? It's like they get obsessed about what does the person have down there.
I got to tell you something first. Okay.
Yeah.
Also, pronoun genders.
Yes.
Person
yes.
as he or she.
I got to tell you something though. This is a characteristic of every culture I've ever been associated with. The very first question that anybody asks about a person is when they're born, and what do they say?
Is it a boy or a girl?
Is it a boy or a girl? It's the first question you ask about a human being. And when you meet an adult human being and you can't tell right away, you have a little kind of a thing that you got to try to decide.
Right.
Well,
I think that's because in our basic animal nature, it's the most important thing about a person.
Because if the meaning of life is to create more life and procreate.
I think it has a lot to do with visualizing what the future of the child is going to be, because the culture does treat people differently depending upon their sexuality. I mean, there's a whole there are a whole lot, not necessarily rationally. I don't mean that you know, it would necessarily should be that way, but girls are given different toys than boys and so forth, and I think also probably the sex of an individual.
I totally know what you just thought. There's something wrong with you, man. Something wrong with you. I read his mind, I think.
You did? You read it?
Yeah. Sorry, Bill. So different toys that they play with.
Well, yeah, and also sexuality does play quite an important part in our lives. I mean, we have, I gather, a fairly large number of sexual fantasies, and when we see people walking along, it triggers sexual thoughts and so forth to a certain extent. So it's something that we're always thinking about. So when the baby is born or very small, then when people come to admire the baby and so forth, it's kind of like they're imposing on the baby this future history, so to speak, the future of what that child is going to be, and probably that adds to the entity that is being talked about and thought about. In other words, it's not just what I see there, but it's also what I, in my mind, see as far as this child's future, you know, and so on. So,
Sure.
So I think that's all kind of understandable, but there's an underlying issue, I think, that has to do with, well, how should our ethics be determined? In other words, on what should our ethics be based? And we know, of course, that there are very characteristic things that we have based it on. For instance, our ideas as to what the ultimate authority considers right and wrong and so forth. And then there's the whole issue as to whether something causes pain, suffering, disability, and or early death, or whatever list of things that you would come up with, the things that we would really like to avoid and so forth. So, and you come up with, I think, a different list of things that should be inhibited if you have those two different approaches. If there's no harm in doing something, but it seems to be a very unusual thing, you know. It's, then why would there be any ethical proposition that says no, that should not be? But there are harmless things that are considered to be bad because of the authoritarian ethics that we have.
So there would be no doubt that statistically it's quite clear that anal sex is a much more prevalent means of transmission of diseases than traditional heterosexual vaginal intercourse, right? That is we're very well understood. There's much more bodily fluid exchange, especially blood exchange, and there's much more potential. The statistical chance of disease transmission is much higher with anal sex than it is with traditional heterosexual sex. That's a fact, right?
Well, it's a fact in some diseases, yeah.
Yeah.
There is a substantially higher rate of early death and disability in playing football, too.
I don't think that is a valid correlation whatsoever between football and anal sex as a risk factor. Like, I see your point.
Can you say why?
Yeah, absolutely. Because we're talking about regulating or passing some type of decency law or some type of provision like a sodomy law over society, and then using the increased rate of disease transmission as a justification for that versus a whole different array of possible injuries as resulting from a sports activity. So they're so disjointed that it's just almost like a mocking comparison.
I'm not following what you're saying. Maybe I was just giving one example. There are probably even better examples. You know, things that people do that cause
Here's what I was trying to say. If you hear this all the time. If someone's smoking weed, right? You say, oh, you shouldn't smoke weed. It's illegal. Blah blah blah. Right? And they say, oh, well, alcohol is much worse, and it's legal, right? That has nothing to do. We're talking about marijuana and the implications of marijuana. The fact that alcohol is legal has nothing to do with marijuana. It's completely. I'm talking about marijuana. Or if you catch somebody in a lie, and they say, "Oh, well, you lied to me last week about blah blah blah." That does no bearing on the current.
Wait. I think if you want to talk about marijuana, it's fair to talk about tobacco.
Sure, but when we're talking about the actual psychological, social, and physiological implications of smoking weed, that's what we're talking about.
Right, but it's ridiculous to talk about that, but not talk about the effects of tobacco.
Let's talk about the effects of tobacco. The effects of tobacco have no bearing whatsoever on the effects of marijuana. the effects of smoking, inhalants, and having these things enter your body, sure, you can find correlations.
They both cause emphysema.
Yeah, they both could cause, sure.
Could we back up? What is it that we're trying?
We're talking about homosexuality here, and so talking about football being dangerous has no bearing on the conversation.
Suppose, for instance, that through science, the risk of something, bad disease from anal sex had been eliminated or reduced to the same risk as involved in many other activities.
Sure.
Then would anal sex be something wrong to do?
I don't think so, but my opinion
So
really.
I think his question
I don't think
is,
it's very
if
relevant.
anal sex is safe, what's your objection?
I don't have a particular objection to it. In my personal
Yeah, the
opinion.
best thing is this group doesn't give a shit what you're doing.
Well, I can just put a condom on. Problem solved.
Why is anal sex only associated with homosexuals? I mean,
Yeah,
I think that what happens in people's bedrooms is their own business.
Well, I mean, there's been traditionally in America, there's been sodomy laws that where it's actually a crime. Oral or anal sex would be a criminal act.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, from what I understand, there's still places in the country where there's still such laws on the books.
The United States military.
So
If you're in the United States military, it's a felony offense.
and does the state have some type of does the state have a legitimate claim to or legitimate right even to claim what someone does? Do they have a right to say what is allowed and not allowed, what's decent and not decent?
Yeah, as long as they pass the law.
Well,
So-
the word decent is a little bit.
Or what's criminal and what's not criminal?
Criminal and not criminal.
Well, that has to do with a decision that has been made by a legal entity.
Sure.
But
So if I forbid anal sex-
but decent, that implies something else. I don't think.
Let's just stick with criminal or not criminal. So if I make a rational decision and I say that homosexual engaging in sodomy, engaging in anal intercourse is illegal, if I'm a legislative body and I say that, and I'm trying to come up with a justification to that, and I say, well, here's my statistics that prove that form of intercourse is much more likely to transmit a disease. Here's the numbers that prove it. That's why. So for public safety, we're passing this rule. Does the government have a
And who's going to
legitimate?
enforce the law?
Well, I mean,
You're going to come into
that's-
every bedroom and free to say, I can see what you're doing.
that's the enforcement side. Like, so speed limits, there's no possible way that there's insufficient capability amongst law enforcement to sufficiently make sure speed limits are enforced. It's not possible. You can't pull everybody over. Everyone's speeding, right? So they get the ones that are really speeding high. So what I'm saying is, like, does the government have a legitimate authority to regulate such things?
What you can do is it creates what's called a halo effect. You pull over one, then the others see that they've been pulled over, and they slow down too.
So therefore, these type of laws might have a legitimate place, and you could justify it. But what happens is the cultural pressure of the society will place on the legislation, and the cultural pressure becomes greater than the logistical or empirical pressure, scientific pressure that's being put on.
But again,
The laws.
the basic fundamental rationale for declaring something as being bad behavior and therefore perhaps needing some kind of legal procedure to inhibit it, what is that basic rationale? And I think that we have a history of not figuring out exactly how dangerous something is and then forming our opinions about decency on that basis. But instead, it's on the basis of other things that don't have any particular relationship to how much pain, suffering, disability, and early death they cause, except by virtue of the cultural attitude that it is bad behavior. In other words, the cultural decision, so to speak, that
Right.
this is bad behavior can then mean that the engaging in that behavior does cause PSDD.
Sure.
But that's but the question is it really harmful in any particular way other than irrational cultural
Bias.
victimization
Yeah.
of those people.
That's a great point. Please.
None of that has anything to do with how things become legal and illegal in the United States of America, nor has it ever been the reasons why things become illegal in the United States of America. The thing is that there's a lot of public outroar, and this will get me elected. So I'm for or against this thing very vociferously, and I'll help pass the law because it'll get me elected. And that means that the rank and file of universally enfranchised dumbass people in this country voted for it. Voted for the guy who said he'd get rid of it or get it.
Well, that's what I'm saying. That's the cultural attitude. So where does that cultural
No, that's
attitude come from?
That's the
It does
That's
not
the
come from
operant
PSD.
fact. That's the actual consequence of our legal system. And it has nothing to do with science or statistics or any of that sort of thing. The HB2 law. The 4 people who were asked publicly by newspapers how many crimes had been prevented by HB2 couldn't answer it because there was no list of anyone who'd ever had the crime happen prior to HB2 for them to compare it to, but it's been 0 since then. But who knows? Well, the fact is, it's never about that. It's never about that. I cannot vote to say it's okay. I cannot publicly state that it's okay to be gay if I want to run for office in North Carolina. Can't get elected. Just for saying it out loud, not even suggesting anything.
But that goes along with my point.
No, it isn't. It says your point is irrelevant. It doesn't matter. That's not how laws are made.
Well, then you're not understanding me.
No, I am understanding you.
Well, you think you
People don't make their decisions on the basis of how likely it is to produce
What?
your PTSD, whatever it is. That's not how they think.
What I'm talking about is the issue of ethics. In other words, what is considered to be bad? In other words, how is the decision made?
Does the government have a...
I'm not talking about how are laws made. I wasn't talking about that. I was talking about how do we come up with the idea or arrive at the idea that this behavior is bad behavior, whether there are laws against it or not. And there are, and basically our ways of doing it have been very non-rational in the past.
And still are.
And still, yeah, I agree with that.
So let's apply the rationality to this particular topic.
So the rationality would have to do with switching to, well, what are the actual negative consequences of doing this? Not negative consequences because of how the culture will react, but negative consequences like, will disease result? Will somebody be harmed? Will somebody have early death? Will this foster, better education, and et cetera, whatever it is. In other words,
Right.
the consequences of the behavior itself, independent of the bad consequences that might occur because of the
Sure.
irrational cultural attitudes.
So I'm a strong advocate for sexual education in schools, sexual education in families, sexual education across the board. I think the topic should be lifted out of the ranks of taboo. It should be discussed thoroughly,
Yes.
empirically, thoroughly, rationally with children of all ages throughout
Yes.
throughout their development, so that when they have their period, they know what's going on, right? All the way up to the different possible effects of diseases that you're going to contract through all different types of sexual contact and engagement. I think that's totally appropriate. I think it should be discussed very much, very liberally.
That
Yeah, please,
raises,
Jerry, you were going to say?
Well, no, I was theoretically, yeah,
Mhm.
the taboo, wish that weren't there. But I can see the individual parent who's saying, I don't want somebody else telling me that, they're telling my kids what is or isn't appropriate, or, I mean, I'm I'm witnessing so many sincere parents who feel like they should be teaching their kids. They don't, but they don't want somebody else teaching their kids.
But that's happening anyway, right? Society is teaching our kids no matter what.
Yeah.
No matter what we do,
Yeah.
to some extent, society is.
And this
teaching
issue, of course, came up really big here in this group when you were inviting Megan to say, well, how are kids of your age viewing this? In other words, getting the perspective. And then you were criticized, that's,
Yeah, well-
you shouldn't be saying that, we're a group of old men and so on.
Right.
So,
But that's
it's-
okay, I don't mind that.
No, but,
And-
but I mean, isn't it important for children, teenagers and so on to be able to talk about sexual issues?
Yes, it is, but in the
rationally.
current culture vernacular, that could be a really point of stress and contention for a child. I think it's a valid point, and both points should be raised, and some kind of conversation like that should be broached in probably a more seasoned and tempered way than such an abrupt way. I think it's fair criticism, personally, to bring something up impromptu like that and abruptly in the current cultural landscape. So I think I believe it was an appropriate criticism, to be honest with you.
Well, but there's a cultural irrational component.
Yes, there is.
That
Right,
we're living in.
right, that's right.
And so
That's
that's the problem, the cultural victimization.
Absolutely.
that,
It was right all the way across the board. That's the thing. That's the thing, is that 3 or 4 people are raising completely accurate, correct points, even though they seem like they're leading to a different conclusion. But overall, it's right, it's spot on. So she should be part of the conversation, right? But in a very different, brought into it in a completely different way, not so abruptly.
I think
So we try to change the culture, but at the same time, do it recognition of the current state of the culture. Yeah.
I think rather a lot needs to be done in our particular venue to make it appear like a better place to bring up the subject to your daughter.
Yeah, right.
I think her
Right.
opinion is the only one that has any validity on the subject of should she come to this group of old men and talk about her sexuality.
Well, that wasn't really what
Yeah.
Chris was saying, well, not to talk about
Yeah.
her sexuality, it was to report to us what kids her age were talking about. That's the way I heard it.
Well, and see, I've witnessed this. I've been on like field trips as a chaperone and stuff like this, and volunteer in the school enough to know the answer to that question. So that was a secondary reason why it wasn't really necessary to put her on the spot. But at the same time, from my experience in this realm, is they're talking about it a whole lot.
Yeah.
Right? A whole lot more than we talked about it, and the amount of misinformation that's being sent is dramatic. It's ridiculous, crazy quantities of
That was
misinformation.
always true.
And that, right, I was just going to raise that same point too, and that's always been the case. And so an adult, rational, right, approach to talking to kids about this is very necessary, just as much today as it was in the past. But they're being exposed to pornography, they're being exposed to sexual deviance, they're being exposed to a dramatic, wide array of sexual deviance, unlike anything that I was ever exposed to when I was a child. And I've had that conversation with my kid about what that is not typical sexual contact. That we're looking at extreme cases here. And the fact that you have access to information is something I wish it wasn't the case, but this is the reality. So you're going to be exposed to this information. So I'm not going to sit down and like watch it with her and guide her through it. That would be kind of extreme. I could probably go to jail for that. But at the same time, I'm going to tell her I know this stuff is out there, and you have to realize that that's very deviant, atypical behavior. To try to frame it in some type of within normal social acceptable limits. It's very difficult to be a parent in these type of things. Technology is moving the access to this information. And the misinformation about this LGBT community, this is not being discussed right now. This is not being discussed. You know what's being discussed? It's natural, you're born that way, because Lady Gaga said so, right? In the current pop cultural vernacular, it is a natural cause. You're born that way, it's a deterministic thing.
Yeah.
That is the current...
You're born gay.
Born gay.
But that's no choice.
And this is the belief system that's in place with no empirical evidence.
Do you think?
Only some epigenetic markers.
Might that be true most of the time?
Yes, yeah, yes, yes, yes. And so, you know, how do we handle this kind of thing socially responsibly, right? I can't impose on my child this like radical viewpoint, even if it's the right viewpoint, and then send her to her peer group. Imagine if I did that. Imagine if I went through and she became an expert on the actual epigenetic markers, all the latest research in right, and she really knows about all this kind of stuff, and goes in there and all of her peers believe that you're born that way. And so then I send her in there armed with all this information, scientific, accurate information, latest studies, all this kind of stuff, and she goes, no, you're not born that way. The best evidence suggests that it's a combination of nature versus nurture, with only some possible correlations in epigenetic markers. She'd be crucified by the peers.
But I think that would be leaving out a very important part of the parenting process and the educational process, namely an awareness of what the dangers are within the culture, the irrationalities within the culture, so that the child doesn't just go out and get herself into trouble by virtue of radical ideas and so forth that are not going to be accepted, where there could be bad consequences.
Boy, so there's this huge, we have to toe the line, there's this huge fence then position we have to take as parents in 2017, right? We have to try to give our kids the most accurate picture of reality that we can, but we don't want to make it so asymmetric that within their peer group they're ostracized or they become some type of bizarre, strange, weird kid. You know, what is the fine line?
But education about that, in other words, I think that you can educate your child not only with regard to the topic, but also with regard to how to handle it in the social situation that the child is in. And that's another area of education that the parent can engage in, helping the child to understand the irrational and dangerous cultural phenomena that the child is going to go into. Mm-hmm. I mean,
yeah, but I've already lost her 15 minutes ago. You know, that's the problem.
Yeah.
You know, it's got to be sound bites. You know, that's the norm here. It's got to be condensed into some type of really quick soundbite that's going to resonate. You know,
well,
it's the culture.
that might be an indication. You know, that the child is having difficulty, and that difficulty, in other words, the difficulty in becoming aware of something or thinking about something, that difficulty would be dealing with it would be a part of the parenting process also.
Tough.
Yes.
Very big challenge. Very big challenge.
Child rearing is enormously complex.
Please.
It's not just sound bites. It's being there, being available 24/7, and some of that time you shut the hell up and let them deal with it themselves. Because mostly they got to live it. You just have to pontificate about it. And if they recognize anything you say as something you've told them before, if they hear a set of words strung together in the same order from you that they've heard, they stop listening on the third word. Believe me. And they're never going to listen to that string of words again. And when they get the feeling that you might be going to start those same string again, they'll tune you out.
If that's happening, that's something that needs to be addressed. There's something going wrong in the child rearing process. But I understand that almost everybody would agree with you.
Okay.
Well, I'm trying my best to be available. She's on the live stream right now, so.
Oh, hi.
So I mean, she's listening, right? So.
Good.
Yeah, and it's probably with music going at the same time. You know, but you get in where you can, right? You get in where you get. Yeah.
Television.
If you want to be more than one part of her multitasking, I think that's a little selfish.
She has 5,000 subscribers on her YouTube channel. There's only 4 on Nova Social, and her most popular video has over 400,000 views. The most popular video on us is 23. So, you know, maybe she's got an insight here. She's winning in the metrics. Yeah. For now.
She's better looking than you are, Chris.
Well, yeah, that's that too. There's 4 people on the live stream, and there's been no questions or comments in the last 20 minutes or so. So this whole thing
probably means that it's really interesting area that we're talking about.
Yeah. So to me, this whole crux of the social aspect falls kind of in these two brackets right here. If I were to bracket the implications of natural causes, if it's a natural cause of homosexuality versus a nurture cause, I think that then is a huge deterministic kind of point of view on which way most things go with this topic. If your belief system, or if the truth is that it's a nature thing, that then has all types of implications. If the belief system is that it's a nurture thing, or the reality is that it's a nurture thing, that then becomes a whole different array of characteristics as well.
Gets into the free will versus determinism.
Yes, right away we get into free will versus determinism. And it's very interesting, collectively, does the leadership or does the authority of the state, should it or does it, have dominion over these type of things? And, it does legally have dominion of it, but does it have a responsibility? Is there some type of responsibility in leadership to determine what is decent, to go back to that word? And, there's some cultures or some countries that have a ministry of culture. I don't know if we have that in the United States or its equivalent, but a lot of countries have an actual ministry of culture, knowing that culture has such a huge impact on the citizens of their country. So as a culture, we've shifted into this direction to where...
What is the... I've heard of that, but I don't know anything about it. Ministry of Culture, what do they do?
They make deterministic choices over what should be considered proper or improper within the culture, and implement.
Usually what they have direct control over is all the museums.
And the
History.
And how history of that country is presented.
But it can also be ordinances, how you're allowed to behave within certain
and the
depends on the
availability
country.
of resources for music and for
Type of music.
Well, but for education in music and things like that would also be under the Minister of Culture, because the Minister of Education would rather have them doing hard science. So you've got to have somebody in there pitching for the arts.
So I don't know if the United States has any kind of direct correlation to that. I don't think it does, but I don't know. The implications of culture is enormous. We kind of talked about that several times. Culture becomes an enormous thing, and right now the prevailing cultural ideology towards homosexuality is born that way. That is in the vernacular right now. That is in the culture. That is the predominant idea and opinion. And the science doesn't support that from what I've been able to find. And so in my particular peer group, in talking about this topic, I've been shunned many times for expressing that point of view. Not saying that I think anything, just saying what I believe the facts to be have caused me to be shunned in my peer group. Because obviously I have a peer group that's going to be more liberal oriented, obviously. Based on my radical viewpoints.
So you've expressed which opinion?
I've expressed the point of view. Well, there's no evidence to show that anyone's born that way. It's known that there's no genetic. There's only potentially some epigenetic, and the science on that has been shown to be not accurate or filled with bias. So
is it kind of maybe the role of the deterministic scientific genetic explanation of homosexuality and other such things, kind of an escape mechanism from the culture, as opposed to it being a new thing that is actually contributing just by virtue of its rationality and so forth. In other words, to what extent are people trying to escape from the cultural victimization by saying, "Look, I don't have any control." In other words, I was born this way.
Right.
It's determined, not free will.
Right. I want to share this. I think it's gold. Right. Is that I have a friend, Mark, that is very, very Christian, very sincere about it, like really cerebral guy, very smart guy. And I asked him about this exact topic. We're talking about it. And he goes, well, people know that it's wrong. People know that homosexuality is wrong, right? And so they convince themselves, they want to believe that it's genetic, and they have no course over it, they have no choice. They want to believe that. And so they all want to live in sin and do what they do, and be homosexual and do all the things that they want to do. And they know it's wrong. And so they choose the information set that makes them feel better about being a sinner, about being a dirty homosexual.
To what extent
and there might be something there. I mean, I don't agree with that, but there might be some ideas there.
To what extent was he correct that people, quote, know it's wrong? In other words, they just know that it's wrong, and how did they acquire that?
Because they're told all their lives that homosexualities choose that because they're evil and they hate God and they're going to hell forever.
Yeah, so
That's why it's such a popular way to feel that it's a natural cause and nobody gets a choice.
Right.
Because then I don't have to listen to the crap that tells me that I hate God and I want to go to hell. Or I don't care about.
So regardless of those very polarizing and those very charged, those are very charged things on both sides. What is the truth? The truth, I think, matters here. Because it matters. It matters in policy. It matters in our opinions. It matters in how we treat people. There's huge implications of the truth here.
Michael's making the point that I was making, that it ultimately goes back to cultural phenomena, especially within some of the religions. By the way, you haven't mentioned anything about in ancient Greece, as I understand it, recall, it was kind of normal for
and there's
for young
right.
guys to,
I intentionally left that out.
You what?
I intentionally left it out because the topic was contemporary issues in American society, and I didn't want to mix in the whole thing with ancient Greece, how it was normal. The boy takes the semen of the adult. And I didn't want to get into all that.
Why?
Because I don't think it's germane to American policy in 2017.
Yeah, but it's very germane to the issue of where is the ethics coming from. In other words, is it possible to have a society in which homosexuality is even considered to be a normal thing for the majority?
It is possible. Well, in our Judeo-Christian kind of Puritan background here in the United States, we inherit that culture of that sexual taboo,
right.
And we inherit the Christian orientation towards this topic. There's no doubt
isn't
about it.
that a crucial part?
Yes, it
of
is.
this whole
I'm not
thing?
afraid to talk. I'm not afraid to talk about anything, but the bringing into this discussion the Christian origins to the ethical repulsion towards homosexuality is totally valid. That's in the culture.
Isn't it interesting?
You
Isn't
just
it
pointed out so
interesting
eloquently.
that we've gone an hour and 3/4 and have only 1/4 of an hour left before this issue came up?
Of
And
the cultural religious connection?
Yeah, the religious issue, yeah.
Well, let's, to my understanding of that, of diving really quick to the religious issue, is that my belief system, now this is really radical. My belief system is that the Christian orientation with this kind of sin concept, and this built-in orientation that man is evil by nature, is a very dangerous, is a cancerous thought in society. It's been there for a long time.
I agree.
And that I wish could get pulled out of our vernacular to some extent, because this orientation, this thought process that everyone is evil by nature, I think is a very toxic, almost to the borderline mental disorder. Because I think it's almost like a mass delusion, that if you think that everyone is evil, that's going to change your opinion, holy cow, dramatically, right? If the implication of the nature of man is that man is evil, boy, that has a lot of implications. And I think that's an extremely unhealthy viewpoint to have of people, and will lead to all types of bad behaviors. And I think that will lead to something like watching porn like crazy and doing all these deviant behaviors.
Is pornography deviant?
Excessive amounts of it, of course, is deviant.
Well, you're saying excessive amounts of anything is deviant.
No, here's why pornography is very unhealthy to consume even regularly, is because the then image that you'll have of the objectification of women that you see in pornography is profound. It is profound. The objectification of women is rampant in pornography, right?
Well, men are also objective.
Oh yeah, the objectification of the human objectification of human beings in any regard I find repugnant. For
But
example,
what is objectification?
treating a person like an object, just like a corporation, they're going to call you a human resource.
Well,
That's a derogatory.
well, now-
To a police officer, you're a suspect.
Okay.
To a doctor,
but
you're
I'm
a patient.
I'm not understanding exactly if two people get together and they figured it'd be fun for one of them to tie the other up or whatever it might be, then what? Why is that objectifying? Why is that not just having a good time?
Because the guy watching the tape is objectifying both of them.
So
Okay, so if you watch a football game or you watch a movie,
If I watch a football
you're
game, I'm
objectifying.
objectifying these gladiators who aren't even allowed to actually kill each other.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, it's all objectification.
But what's
Right.
what's wrong with watching a football game?
because it degrades our humanity.
And
we-
glorifies
when we-
violence and
Now
and sells a lot of beer.
Yes, well, no, I agree. I am not in favor of football, but
It's the
what
same
I-
reason I reject the Christian model. It's a degradation to human beings. It's saying human beings are all evil by nature and you're all a piece of crap compared to God.
Okay, but then
You know?
what about
It's an
a play
objectification.
in which people are, I mean, like a Shakespeare play or something? Is that objectifying? In other words, just because
There'd be various
one-
degrees.
Just because
Various
one
degrees.
is watching a play, I don't think means that one is objectifying human beings.
Also, the expectation then of what sex is going to be, if that becomes your model for what sex and intimacy, right, is supposed to entail, or what the normal is there, is that you're then pulling your vision, your model in your mind of what sex is about and what sex, you know what I mean? You're pulling it in that direction, and I
Well,
think that
it's-
gets pretty unhealthy pretty quick.
I think any individual has a kind of sexuality, the things that they prefer and so forth. It's not like everybody does it the same way and so forth. And people like to play at sex and they like
Right.
to do these
So-
strange things and so forth.
Right,
So
so
what?
that-
So why is that something bad? Why is
Well,
that
I'm
something
trying to tell you.
objectifying? Now,
I'll tell you why.
No, wait. I'm not talking about doing something to an extreme. I'm not talking about that.
Okay, so the nightly news will give you a vision of what's happening in society. That's completely different than really what's happening in society. Yes, those things are happening, but the world isn't going to hell in a handbag. And the majority of what's happening in the world is good, gracious things happening all the time. So the evening news is a misrepresentation of the reality of what's going on there, right? The normal sex that's happening in people's bedrooms all across the country, right, doesn't involve, for the most part, sure, some of them involve whip chains, chains, dips, whips, chips, whatever they call it, all this kind of all this kind of screaming and toys and machines and all the other deviant, sure, that's happening to some extent, but the actual kind of normal, what's considered normal, sex that people are experiencing throughout the country is not like it is shown in porn.
Well, no,
The porn is showing a misrepresentation of what, so it's creating a false
But
expectation.
that you could say that about any movie.
Yes,
Yes.
You
I agree.
Go to
Yes.
Star Wars.
They're hideously
and-
evil.
Yes,
So-
and that's why
and
there's
so
movies
have
that are
to-
PG.
You
So
have to
because
become educated that Star Wars is not what's happening out there. I
No,
don't
no,
think
no,
that
no,
that's,
no.
If you
No.
don't know it,
Hold
then
on.
yes, you need to be educated
Right.
that Star Wars is not what's happening.
right, so PG, a movie that's PG, is recommended that a parent guides that child through the understanding of what's happening in this movie. That it's not real. The juvenile mind doesn't have the same ability to connect what is normal versus what they're witnessing as much as an adult does because of the experiential, right? Because of experience of mind.
It's a
So-
little bit. I think it's a little bit different than.
Okay,
that.
so why is there a rule, on the books that children below 18 shouldn't be watching pornography? Because don't you think the child is getting an unhealthy idea of what sex is about through watching porn? Of course they are. I mean, of course.
I think it depends upon the context. It depends upon, if the child is, we were talking earlier about good sex education for the child beginning, in infancy or whenever
Right.
it would start.
Right.
the fact that people do all sorts of strange things, not just in the area of sex, but in all areas of life, people kind of like to try out the extremes and so forth, and that's
Naturally.
That's a part of entertainment and so forth.
Would you be getting an accurate and a proper idea about what sex is through pornography? Of course not.
I'm going to ask you,
Correct.
Right.
I'm going to ask you, do you believe that classic internet pornography is a useful tool for teaching sex education to children?
No.
Right.
Thank you.
Right. So that's what I'm saying.
That's all he said.
Yeah. And so since
And you've
then,
been trying to get him to disagree with that.
I don't think that's.
but see, if I don't do anything as a parent, if I don't intervene, my child will be exposed to those ideas, and so I have that as a threat, or as not threat.
Well, but isn't it more
wrong word.
likely that your child
It's
will
there.
be exposed to it, but it can't be
Sorry.
talked about?
Right. So what I try to do is I try to create as much open dialogue as possible.
Yeah.
And then
I agree.
and I say though also that is a misrepresentation of what what's available on what
Yes.
you'll find on the internet is a misrepresentation. It's an extreme of sexual encounters that people have in
Well,
reality.
it's people
Try to put in
playing.
proportional reality.
It's people playing at something that they can also be serious about.
I just wouldn't use those words. I want to use the extreme language to show that it's an extreme.
To
Yeah.
deter.
Yeah. To some extent, yes. Yes, that's true.
So is your objection that it's not an accurate representation, or what? I mean,
It's
well, what if it
twofold.
was accurately represented? Would you be then object to it?
Yes, because I'm dealing, yes, but let me qualify. Yes, because I'm dealing then also with the cultural context by which that's placed into. I have to be aware of it. It's always present. It's always present, okay? She has to navigate her world within the cultural context. You
That's
can't,
right.
I
And
can't
you-
detach
and
that.
You do also.
And I do also, right.
Because, so
Right.
therefore, if you, see, I'm questioning the basic ethical issue here. But of course, you are in danger in the culture, just like your
That's
child
right.
is.
That's right. That's exactly what I say too. As I say,
So-
that's not healthy for me to watch that kind of stuff either. So I don't even do it as an adult. It's not an adult-child thing. I don't partake in this at any kind of regular interval in any kind of way at all. I consume very little of this type of content because I'm very aware that it's a misrepresentation of reality and it's going to skew my mindset. If once you have some visual in your mind, you can't erase it. There's no erase button for your mind. There's no delete. If you're exposed to certain extremes of deviance, like if you go on the dark web and you start looking at snuff videos, that's in your mind. That's in your mind now. That's part of you, right? That's extreme. And you can keep getting it more and more extreme. You go into this dark web, you go into the deep web and you go into the dark net and all that kind of stuff, you'll find stuff that's crazy. Like, and if that's in your mind, that's there. That's in your brain now. And that will definitely influence your ideas and shape your behavior.
But that is kind of unclear. Just because you've seen a movie in which somebody murders somebody doesn't mean now murder is in your mind.
Absolutely it does. Absolutely it does. But to what extent is a different story. But certainly it's in my
yes.
mind. I can picture all types of violence in my brain from things that I've seen on movies,
Okay,
even if
yes,
it's simulated.
But that doesn't mean that you will therefore engage in violence.
No, but it means that my mind will then, for my neuroplasticity, will then have an increased tendency to think that that is normal, right? When the reality is that human beings don't express that level of violence to each other. And so I want to have a consistent, non-asymmetric view of reality, right?
I think that you keep trying to say that everything is okay. It's all context. And I don't think that's true. But I also don't
Well,
think
I don't
that
think that's
I
a
don't
good-
think that everything is evil either.
I don't think that that's a good representation of what I'm saying.
He's been saying he doesn't want to expose his daughter to pornography and he wants to protect her from pornography. And you've been trying to convince him that no, that's not necessarily the right thing. That's what you've been doing for 20 minutes.
I don't think so. I think
Is that what you felt like he was doing?
Only to a limited extent. But
No, I was
I'm
not,
saying that I
was
don't
not
think-
suggesting that. I'm trying to talk about the deeper level ethical issues about, and
So-
also about the very complex
Yeah.
issues in child rearing. In other words, if your child is being exposed to pornography, but you can't know anything about that because that's something you can't talk about, then your child is left all alone, and the problem that you're talking about is worse for your child.
Right, so
Parental guidance, it gets back to parental guidance.
Right,
about
but I'm not
helping a child to understand and interpret the irrationality of the culture.
Right, but I have to do it in the abstract because I can't be there 24/7 looking over her shoulder
Of course,
every second of
of
every day.
course.
So I have to give her tools to rationalize and understand these
Of
things in
course,
context and
yes.
abstractly. Yeah.
It's important.
Steve,
Is it important to teach people what is normal or what is good?
I would say both. I would say that what's reactional is to say the culture has this expression. I disagree with the culture in this way, and I feel like this is the reality. But then not do it in such an asymmetric way that you create someone that then can't have a fluid social encounter with their peer group. Because at that particular age of a child, the acceptance of the peers is the most detrimental thing. If they're not accepted as their peers, that is the most harm that you can cause that child at that age, like a 13-year-old child.
But helping your child to learn how not to be turned against by her peers
Yes.
is very important.
Yes, and so that's the balance.
But that
right?
doesn't mean by keeping your child ignorant of things.
Absolutely
In other
not.
words, you can highly educate your child. One area of education being the care that you have to take in what you do within your culture, that the culture is irrational and so forth, and that helps your child.
There was this family in my hometown that didn't, sorry, I didn't interrupt you, but there's this family in my hometown whose parents did not let those kids watch TV at all, period. No, it's the devil box, right? Not watching it. Those kids had okay, this probably isn't true every time, but these kids did not work, so did not fit in socially at all. Kids were talking about Looney Tunes, and they had no part of that conversation. Kids were acting out things they saw on TV, modeling behavior. Kids had no context for that. They were out of the group all the time. To this day, it ended up being drug addicts.
Yeah, but they didn't objectify things.
They ended up being so asymmetric with their peer group as a child, it damaged them very severely, intellectually, all kinds of ways. It had serious consequences. It had very serious
So helping
consequences.
your child to learn about the irrationality of culture and the dangers there, I think, is an important part of child rearing, as opposed to
Right.
just not talking about the dangers.
I don't think he ever brought up never talking about it. You keep going back to, I think, don't advocate for, I don't think anybody has advocated for never talking about
It
it.
was an exaggeration to say never talk about, but what we were talking about was whether something can be conversation between a parent and a child, and there is a tendency, I think, a very strong tendency for parents to feel quite inhibited about what they can talk to their child about, and such that the child gets such, quote, education elsewhere, and not necessarily in the very best way.
It's
Is that
extremely
not-
difficult topic. I mean,
Yes.
because we get into so many gray areas that,
Yeah.
it's almost paralyzing.
Yes.
What is the right choice?
Yeah.
And I don't think anybody has that roadmap. There is
No,
there is no cut and dry answer.
Child
here.
rearing is it's our most technically difficult job.
Let's look at one thing, because pornography would be keen to, if someone was, I would imagine that if someone was very much involved with watching, exposing themselves to a dramatic amount of pornography, okay? Let's take an extreme case, okay? I think that would have some type of inevitable higher than increased frequency that person would probably engage in deviant sexual behavior. What we consider from our normal society as deviant sexual behavior, okay? I'm just making a leap here, like assuming that to be true, okay?
Well, I think that there are other dangers, like the addiction to pornography, and
Right, and that would be a part of this
Yeah.
this conversation as well.
So,
So let's be completely honest. My child does not has smartphones. She has access to the internet all the time. Okay, so let's be fully honest about this conversation and say that if I was really being responsible, really being truly responsible, okay, and said this stuff is there, you're being exposed to it, I'm going to walk you through it. and I start pulling stuff up online and putting it in context, I'd go to prison.
Yeah.
I'd go to prison for
Right.
exposing my child to reality.
Nor is that an educational procedure that I would recommend. You know, in other words.
Yeah, but should I? So why would a parent that does that, which goes consistent with reality, okay, go to prison? You'd go to prison for exposing your child to pornography.
Yeah, well,
But they're being exposed to it all the time. Listen to them talk.
Right. That's a part of the irrationality that
Right.
we are faced with.
That's exactly what I'm saying. So within my culture, I have my own. The culture imposes with me limitations of how I can broach
Absolutely.
even topics with my child, even that
Absolutely.
deal with reality.
Absolutely.
So it's always within cultural context.
Yes.
Always.
Absolutely.
Right. So in my point of view,
But
society at large.
In here, are we not also questioning some of the cultural values that victimize us?
Absolutely are.
Yeah.
It's very germane to this conversation. And so when we broach this then this concept of homosexuality, if it turns into a nurture, which the evidence is looking to suggest, it's maybe some core roots in epigenetic markers combined with a composite of lifestyle, environment, diet, all these exposure, what your relationship was with your mother, all these factors considered. We do get this more nurture perspective than we do nature. Okay, and already I'm out on a limb here. Already that puts me within my peer group in a totally my own category. Now I'm already wrong, right? Quote unquote wrong. I'm already wrong. So if I take it to the next step further and say, then society has a completely different. Society then has complete right to, like, the government then should be able to regulate your choice behavior, right? The government regulates whether I choose to speed on the highway or not. If I do, I get fined. The government puts that restriction on, and nobody thinks that's a problem. So to that, they put the restrictions on homosexuality. You can't get married. Sorry, right? But boy, now I'm really in trouble with my peer group. And now, if I go a couple of steps further with this, I'm a hate crime person. Now I'm creating a hate crime of some type. You see what I'm saying? I mean,
Oh, yeah,
I could be inciting you guys now all to go out and want to do some harm. And, that we can blur those lines. And so we get into this. Boy, that's a system of control, isn't it?
We live in a very dangerous cultural environment.
Right, and then my friend Mark, who is an avid Christian, that says, well, these guys are just because of the sin, and his point of view is actually more consistent with cultural society history of cultural society. Right, and also he's actually more in line with the facts than I am if I take my peer group point of view. Right.
So yeah, I guess we
So-
have
so-
to stop it. But
yeah.
basically, we have a problem that we are immersed in an irrational, dangerous culture. And so one of the
Great
well,
conclusion.
one of the questions is, what can we do to little by little reduce that or make it less dangerous and more rational?
I would be a very high advocate for exercising your freedom to go out on an extreme point of view and try out ideas with each other to expand that vernacular. I think that's the best. Talking about it and stretching the dialogue is our biggest chance
I agree.
at changing that. But unfortunately, I don't think the cultural impacts coming from the top down. I think those influences are so much stronger than we're going to be able to grow from the bottom up, if you will. So I think the grassroots movement would be much more difficult to invoke change.
The top represents us. We put people at the top. We create our religions. We create our culture because that's a part of us, and that's who we are. We're not yet really rational, and we are still rather dangerous.
Couldn't have said it better myself. So our time's up. It's past 9, but I want to open the floor. Jerry didn't speak much.
Thank you, but
No.
It was an interesting conversation.
You're like, not this time. Not stepping into that direction.
So nobody came out of the closet?
I am an atheist.
You weren't in that closet.
As always, I personally grow from these things. That whole line of thinking that you raised was fantastic. I never would have thought that. When we were talking about the implications, you know, when you were raising that, I never would have even thought about that. So very good. I'm sure everyone learned something tonight. And hopefully it's not just that I'm radical in some way.
You mentioned the topic before I left home.
Yeah.
My wife said, my God, when would you know, when did we ever lay off of that topic? Because we talked about it so damn much. I've seen so many movies where that's right.
And the statistics show that she's actually accurate.
Yeah.
Right? Is that it's overrepresented.
I said I go because you'll bring up stuff gets brought up here that doesn't get brought up elsewhere. Yeah, that's what
I do like topics that I don't get to discuss anywhere else.
Yes.
Because, you know, I got things to say about them, you know.
Yes, absolutely. No, that's what's so great about
Sadly.
it. That's why I come back.
So just for something funny, guys, my daughter decided to Rick-roll our live stream. And if you know what
Really?
Yeah.
What is
Really?
She Rick-rolled our live stream.
What is that?
It's when
Rick rolls when
you put a mislabeled URL up and tell people to go look at it thinking it's going to be something. And then it's not. It comes from, originally it turns out to be a copy of Rick, whoever his name is.
Astley.
Rick Astley.
So is she directing people here or directing them away?